Is going smoothly. So, why don't we begin and let us join in prayer? Lord God, we give you thanks for all the modern technology that we have, and we know that, like anything, it is how we use it. And so, we pray that this time together using this technology will be a blessing unto us, and that we in turn may take the wisdom that is a part of this experience this evening, and we may carry it into the day and the week ahead. Help us in all times and in all ways to find ways to be faithful to the one who laid down his life for us. Amen. Okay, so going to do a quick recap from last week, and then we're going to launch into tonight's lesson. And last week, we began our journey into the book of Job. We talked about how biblical scholars are divided on whether there was actually a historical person by the name of Job. We're not sure where Uz is located or was located. That's where he was from. We do know that there was an ancient tale about a man named Job, and that somewhere along the line, someone took this ancient tale and basically cut it in half, because the beginning and the end, the first two chapters and the last part of the last chapter, is all in narrative form. And then in between this narrative part of the book of Job, there's 42 chapters of poetry, and that's what we're going to get to tonight. Last week, we looked at that narrative portion at the beginning and saw that Job experienced 5 tragedies. Some of them were man-made, and some of them, 2 of them, were natural disasters. I shared my feeling that God does not directly cause bad things to happen to us, but God allows them to happen to us because we have free will, which is a gift from God. And just as a parent at some point has to allow a son or daughter the free will to make their own decisions, God does the same thing with us. And sometimes we use that free will to make decisions that aren't good for us. For example, someone who becomes an alcoholic, that is using free will in a way that brings about bad consequences. And that is also true for others who use their free will to make decisions that adversely affect us. The other part of the equation is, what about natural disasters and those kind of tragedies, earthquakes and hurricanes and volcanoes and tornadoes, so-called acts of God? My thinking about that is that it's the package deal, if you will, of living in a world that is alive, and anything that's alive moves and changes. If we wanted to live in a world that wasn't alive and changing, where we didn't have to worry about earthquakes and tornadoes and all those other things, the option would be to live someplace like the moon, which is a dead world. And so natural disasters are a consequence of living in this wonderful, beautiful world that God has created. So now we move on to the poetry section, and it goes from chapter 3 halfway through chapter 42. Last week, we were introduced to 3 friends of Job who come when they hear these terrible things that have happened to him. And as the first part of the narrative comes to a close, they are sitting with Job in silence. The three friends are Eliphaz the Temanite, which is the best we can guess the land of Edom, which is in southern Jordan. The second friend is Bildad the Shuhite, somewhere in Arabia, and Zophah the Naamanite, and that's also somewhere in Arabia. And so I am going to read the first passage, Job 3, verses 1 through 7. If you have a Bible in front of you, you can follow along. I'm using the English Standard Version, which is what we use in our sanctuary. And then I'm going to be reading Job 4, 1 through 9. And the first reading is Job speaking. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter into it." So what we see here is Job finally getting to his breaking point. Earlier, his wife had told him to curse God. He said, "You speak as a foolish woman." And after the friends arrive, still, Job is suffering in silence. But now he's reached his breaking point. He curses the day of his birth, which was the ultimate act of faithlessness. It's basically saying, "God, I reject this gift of life that you have given to me." So then Eliphaz, one of the friends, speaks. And this is chapter 4, verse 1. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, "If one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. By the way, I will say that if any of you have questions, comments, and you have a YouTube username, you can type them into the chat section on the right of your screen, and I will do my best to answer. And I always welcome them because I learn from all of you as well. So what we see here is Job denouncing the day of his birth, and then Eliphaz comes in and basically begins to argue with Job. And essentially, this is what goes on for the next 40 chapters. Job and the friends go back and forth. Job makes a statement. One of the friends speaks. Job replies. The next friend comes up and he makes his arguments. And essentially, what the three friends are saying is, Job, you and I both know that bad things don't happen to good people. If you suffer, it means that you did something wrong and God is punishing you. Job responds by basically saying, "No, I haven't done anything wrong." The friends then come back and say, "Well, Job, you as well as I know that no one is perfect, that we all sin. And for you to say that you haven't sinned shows a prideful heart. And that in itself is a sin." Job then comes back and says, "Okay, I admit that I have sinned like others, but I certainly haven't done anything to deserve all of this terrible suffering." Welcome, Gail, Dale. Good to see you. So, this is what goes on for the next 40 chapters. They keep going back and forth, back and forth. And that's why we're not going chapter by chapter, because it would get very repetitive and pointless. So, that's where we are. So we're back to, does God punish people? Does God cause bad things to happen to good people? And on the flip side, it would mean, does God let good things happen to bad people? And, I look at this, and one of the things that I see in the friends is that they're a great example of what not to say when someone is hurting. And I'm sure you can think of situations where someone has said something trying to be helpful, but in reality, they're just making this worse. So, Andy, I see you say that God lets all of the above happen, and I would agree with it. Um, if any of you are familiar with the book that was written, oh my gosh, back in the 80s by Rabbi Kushner. And the title of the book was When Bad Things Happen to Good People. I've got it somewhere up here. I won't dig it out. Rabbi Kushner was the rabbi of a synagogue right here in Newton, Massachusetts. And he wrote this book as he was dealing with a tragedy in his own life. His son was diagnosed with a rare medical disorder. I think it's called pyrrhosia or something to that effect. And essentially, it causes a rapid aging of the body. So his son was 6 years old, but had the body of a 70-year-old. And it's a genetic disease, no cure for it. And usually, the children who are born with it die before they're 10, I think. And so Rabbi Kushner was struggling to make sense of all of this. In his book, his conclusion is that God is powerless to stop things from happening. And I have a hard time with that, because I do believe that God is all powerful. And it's hard to believe that a God who could create the heavens and the earth ex nihilo, which means out of nothing, is powerless to prevent a disease from happening. But again, I believe that God allows things to happen as much as it pains God. And you may remember last week, I shared with you an excerpt from a sermon by William Sloane Coffin, whose son Alex died in a car crash here in Boston, and his car plunged into Boston Harbor and he drowned. And uh, William Sloane Coffin was at his sister's house just outside of Boston when a woman came in with some food, and she mumbled, "I just don't understand the will of God." And that set him off. And he said, "Absolutely, you don't understand the will of God." He says, "Do you think it was God's will that My son probably had one beer too many that night. Do you think it's God's will that there is no street light over that section of Boston Harbor, or that there was no guardrail, or that Alex never fixed that lousy windshield wiper because it was raining heavily that night? And William Sloane Coffin then ended by saying that he couldn't understand how seemingly intelligent people can't get it through their minds that God doesn't go around this world with his hand on steering wheels, his finger on triggers, or his hand wrapped around knives. And he said, you know, his only consolation was knowing that when the waves closed over Alex's sinking car, God's heart was the first of all our hearts to break. And so I agree with that. And I've had that with my own life. My mother, as many of you know, was killed in a snowmobile accident. And I never asked why because it just happened. Let me look at a couple of these comments. Yeah, Dale, so I do agree that when your faith is strong, that it makes it possible for God to help guide you through the storm. And that's why I always tell people that I go to church, not because I'm paid to be here, because even when I'm not here, I go to church. And I go to church when life is good so that my faith will be strong when life is not good and will help me get through those storms. Um, you may remember the story of the wise and the foolish builders. And they each built a house. One built on sand, which was quick and easy, and the other built his house on rock. And the winds and the storms came, and the man who built his house on the sand, it washed away. And Jesus said, great was the fall of that house. And, you know, I've always said, you can build your house on sand, which basically means not having a solid faith foundation. But if you do that, you better pray that it's always sunny in your world. And I don't know anyone who's ever lived a life that is completely sunny. Yes, Leslie, I do agree that Jesus did dispel the notion that a sickness was a punishment from God. There's a story of a man who is blind, and the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, Rabbi, who sinned that this man was born blind, his parents or him? And Jesus said, no, neither. God doesn't work that way. And then Jesus healed the man and said, you know, this man's blindness can be used by God, who didn't cause it, but can use it to show the glory of what Jesus could do. And absolutely, I believe that. You know, there's another story where the Pharisees come to Jesus and they talk about this Tower of Siloam that collapses and kills 18 people. And Jesus says, you know, do you think that those 18 people were worse sinners than anyone else? So, yes, absolutely. I think that Jesus also dispelled the notion that God deliberately causes bad things to happen to good people. So, let's take a little bit more of a look at the three friends and how they respond to Job, who basically loses it and curses the day of his birth. Job is angry with God, and that raises a question: is it a sin to get angry with God? Some people might say yes. I I remember years ago when I was first starting out, I went on a retreat with my youth group. This was up at church in South Portland, Maine, and we did a theme for the retreat. Leo Brascalia wrote a book called The Fall of Freddie the Leaf, and it's about death and dying. And it had one of the most amazing, incredible experiences as we discussed this one evening. And I learned that one young woman in the group had been carrying guilt for her father's death all of these years because she was supposed to be home at a certain time, and her father was out in the backyard doing yard work, and he had a massive heart attack and fell down. And this teenager's younger sister just thought that daddy was sleeping. And so this young woman had blamed herself all these years that if she had come home when she should have, then she would have been able to call 911. Her father would be alive. We had another young man who I knew, although not everybody else knew. His father committed suicide, and he was the one who found his father in the basement. And we talked about this, and all of these stories came out, and a lot of tears. And I asked at one point if it's okay to be angry with God for these things happening. And one of the kids immediately looked up and said, "Yes, it's okay. God's big enough to take our anger." And I thought that's a wise young theologian there. And even Jesus got angry on the cross. The fourth word that he spoke was Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He's quoting the 22nd Psalm. And I've always said it's hard for me to believe that Jesus said that with a smile on his face. He knew what was going on. He knew this was part of God's plan, but still he was feeling all alone and he was suffering and he didn't like it. So I think that the fact that Job gets angry with God is understandable. And I'm certainly not going to throw a rock at him like Eliphaz and the three friends did. Yes, Leslie, you basically said the same thing this young person said in my youth ministry many years ago. God is big enough to take it. And so that isn't the reaction that the three friends had. They get angry and they have this belief. And instead of having compassion for Job, it's more important for them to defend what they believe. It's one of the reasons why I've said that it's always more important to love than to be right. So if you think about it, there are situations that we deal with where people are like the three friends, Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad. Think about some of the things that people say when someone very close to you dies. I'm going to throw out a few of them. One we've already talked about, it must be God's will. Well, first of all, I don't believe death is God's will. If it was God's will, then we wouldn't have the resurrection. I also will say, even if it is God's will, how do we know that in any particular situation it's God's will at that particular moment? How can anyone say that they know the mind of God at any moment to say that, yep, this is God's will? And it certainly doesn't help the person because I don't know about you, but if somebody were to say that to me, I would still be feeling, I don't like it. And actually, it could undermine my relationship with God. Here's another one. I'm sorry, but things will get better. Really? How do you know that? Things may get worse. You know what? I may have lost my father, but I might lose my mother the next day. So, how do you know that things are going to get better? Maybe they will way down the road, but if I'm suffering, that's not what I want to hear. Um, here's another one. Remember that this will make you stronger or a better person. And while that may be true, and I do believe that God can work with you to allow that to happen, it's not the thing to say when someone is suffering. It makes me think of when I was in seminary. And one day, in the middle of a class, or actually the beginning of a class, one of our classmates came in and the person was on crutches. They'd broken their leg. I remember one of the students just being positively giddy about this and saying to the person, "Oh, this is, in a way, this is really wonderful because, now you're going to be handicapped and you're going to be able to understand better what it's like for your elderly parishioners who are crippled and can't do the things that they used to do." And I remember sitting there and thinking, are you crazy? The person broke his leg. And yeah, maybe some good learning can come out of it, but you don't say that. In fact, do you know when the friends were at their best in terms of Job and his suffering? Yeah, Andy, I'm right there with you. So some of you may not know, Andy's wife Jessica passed away. I don't, my gosh, I don't know how many years ago. Probably about maybe 15. And long, courageous battle with leukemia. And yes, Andy, I agree with you. If anyone had said that to you, and I hope no one did say that to you, you would have every right to be angry, just as William Sloane Coffin was angry when the person said that about his son Alex. 2006, I was close. Yeah, 14 years ago. And you know, people say all kinds of things because they don't know what to say, or because they have a belief and they don't want to entertain any possibility that their belief might not be correct, which was the case of the three friends. Um, I also have a saying: the tooth always hurts less when it isn't your tooth that is aching. Makes me think of one of my favorite stories about a husband and wife, and they're on vacation. They go in to see a dentist, and the wife says to the dentist, "Doctor, you got to do something about this tooth. It's ruining our vacation." The dentist says, "Well, let me take a look at it." And she says, "Well, just pull it. We want to get on with our vacation." And he says, "Well, it might not be to be pulled." And she says, "I don't care." And she said, "I don't want any Novocaine. That'll just take too much time. Pull it." And so he says, "All right." He says, "So which tooth is it?" And the wife says, "Show him your tooth, dear." So the pain in the tooth is always less when it isn't your tooth. Yeah. Yeah. So Andy, I do understand what you're saying, that you did hear that it was God's will, and that some Catholics were the ones that tended to say it. I have a great deal of respect for the Catholic faith, um, but I have had similar experiences. There seems to be a different understanding of who God is in some respects. So, yeah, people say things that aren't helpful. Do you know when the friends were at their best with Job? Well, I look it up, go back to that verse. If anyone knows, type it in. So it's true that the friends, they go back and forth in a never-ending debate with Job. And they're basically saying bad things don't happen to good people and you're being punished, Job. This is when the friends were at their best. This is chapter 2, verse 11. When Job's three friends heard of all this evil that had come upon Job, they came each from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamanite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. The friends were at their best when they just sat with Job and they wept with him. And as a pastor, I've learned over the years that there's tremendous grace, even healing, in what is called the ministry of presence. I can think of many times where I've been with someone and they've later said, "Oh, you were such a help and you were such a comfort." And I'm thinking to myself, I didn't do anything. I was just there and I said, "I'm really sorry. And my heart aches for you." As I was looking at all of this and the friends, what they did at first and what they then did later to Job, it made me realize as we continue to deal with this virus that it can bring out the best in us and it can bring out the worst in us. And we see both in the three friends. We see them at their best, just sitting for 7 days with Job and weeping with him. And then we see the worst in them when they find it necessary to throw rocks at Job because he said something that they don't like. And, you know, I've been with people who are suffering and they say things that I don't agree with. But I'm not in that moment going to get into an argument with them because that doesn't do them any good. Yes, Tom, just being there is what is needed, and listening. And I've seen it, many times. And so as we continue to deal with this virus, we can let it bring out the worst in us, or we can let it bring out the best in us. And I'm seeing instances where it is bringing out the best in us. These funds that are being set up to help those who are in need. In fact, I can tell you that I had a conversation this morning with Ella Klansky, who is the chairperson from Christian Community Service, which runs the North Reading Food Pantry. She's also a member of the church here. And she said that because so many people are losing their jobs, they are being flooded with new applicants, new families that are in need of food and help. She also said that they have set up an online giving platform and an online giving platform and the donations in. So you see it bringing out the good in people, but you also see it bringing out the worst in people. And I'm sure you're all familiar with eBay. Did you know that if you go on eBay right now, you can buy 2 rolls of toilet paper? Now, need to know though that they're jumbo rolls, so not your typical toilet paper, big rolls, for $29.99. You say that's bringing out the worst in someone? I certainly do. And here's another one. I actually took a screenshot of this to show to you. If you go on eBay right now, you can get a 32-ounce bottle of hydrogen peroxide, which I believe is a sanitizer, can be used in that way, along with a dropper, and it'll only cost you $33. However, the good news in that is, did you notice that it's free shipping? 2 examples of what we're dealing with bringing out the worst in people. And I think it's disgraceful, and I'll let them answer to God at some point. If you're familiar with Viktor Frankl, he is a Holocaust or was a Holocaust survivor. Yes, such a deal, Andy. You better get it before somebody swoops in and gets it. Only $33 with free shipping. Exactly, Dale. It sells for less than $1. I think it sells for 99 cents in the grocery stores. And I think you can also report gouging to eBay. So I'm hoping somebody reports them. Maybe I'll take the initiative and do it. Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes. So he lost his wife and his children and his parents. He lost his house and all of his possessions. Very similar to what Job went through, although Job's wife didn't die. When he was arrested, he was ordered to take off all of his clothes. Then, as he stood there totally naked, they cut off his wedding ring. While they were doing that, Viktor Frankl said to himself, "You can take away my wife, you can take away my children, you can strip me of my clothes and my freedom, but there is one thing no person can ever take away from me, and that is my freedom to choose how I will react to what happens to me." Theologically, it's called free will. And in any crisis, in any tragedy, in any suffering, we always have the free will to choose how we're going to respond. And as we continue to deal with this reality, the choice is, which version of those 3 friends are you going to be? Are you going to be like the 3 friends who sat there and wept with Job? Or are you going to be like the 3 friends who attacked Job because he was saying something that they didn't agree with theologically? Here's the second quote. Viktor Frankl wrote, "We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." I won't presume to say that in any given situation, I'm going to always let it bring out the best in me. But I pray that if it brings out the worst in me, that I will quickly be aware of it and change course. And this is back to what we've been talking about at the beginning, is why it's so important to keep working on our faith, because the stronger it is, the more likely in a crisis situation, a tragedy where there's suffering, we're going to let it bring out the best in us. I'd like to know a little bit more about those two people who posted on eBay for the hydrogen peroxide and the toilet paper. And my hope is that we would find that their faith is not strong. Or maybe it is, but in this given situation, they've chosen to put greed over love. And by the way, I'm not going to presume to say that everyone who has faith is always going to be a saint. Uh, there's good and bad in all of us. But again, I work on my faith and I'm continuing to work on it and will continue to work on it until the day I die so that it can bring out the best in me when times are difficult. Well, I hope you have all found this helpful. I'm thrilled last week after we posted this that a good number of people have watched this Bible study on our YouTube channel, and I hope that continues. Uh, and I think that once this is all over and done with, I might continue an online Bible study to reach out to people who can't come and actually physically be here, or maybe are a little intimidated because they don't know a lot about the scriptures, or they're just beginning this journey of faith. And if that's anybody out there who watches this, my prayers are for you to keep on with the journey and to keep looking into the scriptures and to keep working on your faith. And so, with that, if there are any last minute comments, I'll do my best to respond to them. You're welcome, Dale. It's great to have you here down in Virginia where you are now. We miss you on Tuesday nights, although we haven't actually had any classes here on Tuesday night um, since you left. But that's one of the things that we're learning with this technology is so many opportunities it's opening. And with our live streaming services, we're hearing from people in New Hampshire and North Carolina, other parts of the state here, people who have been a part of our community of faith who are still able to be connected with us. And I never thought we'd see anything like this. Never could have imagined something less when I was starting out as a young minister 37, 38 years ago. And so I'm still learning, and that's why I love Bible study, because I continue to learn from all of you. In fact, I will give you a heads up. I came to an insight regarding the resurrection stories that changed my attitude about the disciples. And that's going to be the basis of this Sunday's Easter sermon. And so I'm kind of excited about it, and I hope all of you will be as well. An Easter feast in the backyard. Oh, 6 feet away from each other. Very good. Dale, invite them over for church. Well, they get snow and ice down in Virginia too from time to time, although I'm sure it's nowhere near what we get up here. And so, again, thank you, everyone. Share the good news with others and invite them to join us next week. We'll do the third and final session on Job, and I hope it will be worth the time to tune in. God bless. Please, everyone, stay safe.